She cheated, abandoned our 8-year-old on my doorstep, and tried to blame me. Now I've got full custody and the judge made her pay. It all started with a discovery that tore my world apart, finding out my ex-wife had been cheating on me. Danielle and I had spent 6 years together. Our story began like a lot of workplace romances. We were just co-workers at first, and over time, feelings developed, and we fell for each other. Back then, we were both employed at the same company. Things changed when I got offered a much better role at a different firm. That move gave us the freedom to date more openly, without any awkwardness at work. As time passed, we grew closer, eventually tied the knot, and later welcomed our beautiful daughter, Sarah, into the world. It had been years since I last visited my parents, so for Thanksgiving, we decided it was time to take a trip to see them. It felt important, for me, for Sarah, for all of us. I wanted Sarah to spend time with her grandparents, to feel that bond and connection to her roots. When we pulled into my parents' place, they greeted us with open arms and big smiles. They were overjoyed to finally meet Sarah. That evening, dinner was wonderful. We sat around the table sharing stories, catching up on all the things we'd missed in each other's lives. Later that night, Sarah started getting sleepy, so I told everyone I'd put her to bed. Danielle stayed behind, still chatting with my parents. Like most kids, Sarah tried to sweet-talk me into letting her play video games for a bit before bed. With those big pleading eyes, she got me to cave. We ended up playing a game together on her tablet, and I have to admit, it pulled me in more than I expected. Before I knew it, time had slipped away. Realizing how late it had gotten, I took the tablet, tucked her in, and headed back out to the living room. Danielle was still deep in conversation with my folks, so I flopped onto the couch and figured I'd keep playing the game for a little bit. That's when it happened. A message notification popped up at the top of the screen, and I glanced at it without thinking. The message was from someone named Chad. It read, "Missing you already." I froze, my fingers still on the screen. That simple sentence hit me like a truck. At first, I was just confused. Why would my 8-year-old daughter be getting messages like that, especially this late at night? I opened the messaging app, and it didn't take long to figure out what was going on. Turns out, the tablet wasn't Sarah's, it was Danielle's. The tablet must have been synced to her iCloud account. That explained why her messages were showing up here. She probably didn't realize she was still logged in before handing it over to Sarah. With my heart pounding, I opened up the full conversation between Danielle and this Chad guy. What I saw made my stomach turn. I couldn't believe what I was reading, message after message filled with intimate exchanges. I tapped on Chad's contact picture, and my jaw just dropped. It was our neighbor. I had seen the guy maybe once or twice in passing, never gave him much thought. But now I was reading texts between him and my wife that left no room for doubt. This wasn't just some innocent friendship. It had gone far beyond that. Their messages were filled with details of private meetups, things they'd done, and plans they were making. They had even talked about my relationship with Danielle. She had poured her heart out to him, saying she didn't love me anymore, but didn't want to be the one to end things. She claimed she felt ignored by me because I worked too much and told him how grateful she was to have someone like him giving her attention. Chad, for his part, said he loved living next door because it meant he could see her whenever I was away with Sarah. I felt physically sick reading it. The texts were so explicit, so disgusting, I honestly thought I might throw up. Everything hit me at once. My wife had been having an affair, and I found out by accident on my daughter's tablet, of all places. It was the kind of shock that leaves you numb, where your mind scrambles to keep up with the truth that's smacking you in the face. I started taking pictures of the messages with my phone, hands trembling the whole time. I was terrified that Danielle might walk in and catch me. I didn't want to tip her off just yet. And more than anything, I didn't want Sarah stumbling upon any of this. She might be young, but she's smart. I couldn't risk her seeing something like that while playing her game. Once I had saved enough evidence, I logged Danielle out of her iCloud and wiped the tablet clean. I knew her phone would still have everything if I needed more proof later. That night, I barely slept. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, asking myself over and over why. Why would she betray me like this? What had I done to deserve it? The next morning, while my parents took Sarah out for brunch, I decided it was time. I needed to confront Danielle. I needed the truth, and I wasn't going to let her dodge it. When I brought up what I'd found, she immediately went into denial mode like a kid caught sneaking cookies before dinner. But I had the receipts, the messages, the call logs. She couldn't deny what was right there in front of her. And when I laid it all out, she broke. The tears came pouring out, and so did the guilt. She finally confessed. Said she felt neglected, blamed my long work hours, and claimed Chad just happened to be there when she needed someone. She insisted she regretted it, said it wasn't supposed to go this far. I asked her the question I dreaded the most, How long has this been going on? Her answer hit like a punch to the gut. She admitted she'd been sleeping with Chad on and off for a year. A whole year of lies, of sneaking around behind my back while I was busting my tail to support our family. The realization crushed me. It's one thing to fear the worst, but to hear it confirmed in plain words? That kind of betrayal slices deep. The trust we built over the years vanished in an instant. All I could feel was this gut-wrenching pain. I broke down. The tears just came. I couldn't stop them. Danielle kept talking, trying to explain herself, but I wasn't really hearing her anymore. Her words just floated in the background like static. Everything we had was falling apart right in front of us. The fight between us grew more intense with every revelation. We were still in the middle of it when my parents got home with Sarah. One look at our faces, and they knew something terrible had happened. My dad quietly took Sarah to her room, clearly trying to shield her from the emotional hurricane that had just hit our family. Left alone with my mom, I broke down and told her everything, how Danielle had been unfaithful. As I spoke, I watched her face shift from confusion to disbelief, and finally to a deep, quiet disappointment. Meanwhile, Danielle was still crying, putting on this act like she was the one who'd been wronged. She went on, tossing out one excuse after another, blaming my job, saying my long hours had pushed her into Chad's arms, claiming that if I'd only paid her more attention, none of this would have happened. According to her, Chad was just her emotional support during the tough times, and now, supposedly, she regretted it all. My mom sat there, trying to absorb the weight of what she was hearing. But when I mentioned that the affair had been going on for an entire year, that was it, her face turned red with anger. She looked Danielle square in the eye, disappointment written all over her, and told her, without a hint of hesitation, to leave their house immediately. The room went completely silent. I stared at Danielle, still sobbing and clinging to her victim act. I told her she needed to go. Sarah and I would be staying at my parents' place for the rest of the holiday, just as we had originally planned, before this whole disaster unfolded. Danielle must have realized that none of us were buying her excuses anymore. She didn't argue, didn't beg. She just nodded quietly and walked upstairs to pack. 10 minutes later, she was gone. When the front door clicked shut behind her, a heavy stillness settled over the house. The kind that feels like a pressure on your chest. I sat there, alone with my thoughts, feeling like I was drowning in a sea of betrayal, heartbreak, and anger. The next few days were brutal. I was trying to make sense of everything, but the pain just kept hitting me in waves. My mom, after seeing it all firsthand, sat down with my dad and told him the whole story. His reaction mirrored hers, shock, disbelief, and a deep sense of hurt. It wasn't just me who'd been betrayed. They had welcomed Danielle into our family with open arms, treated her like a daughter. And now this. Sarah, being only 8, didn't understand what was really going on. She kept asking where her mom was, her little voice full of concern. Not knowing how to tell her the truth, I lied. I said Danielle had to leave suddenly for work. The look in her eyes when she asked about her mom, it broke me. But she was just too young to be burdened with the ugly truth. The holidays, which were supposed to be a time for laughter and togetherness, ended up being wrapped in silence and sadness. My parents did everything they could to support me, to help hold me up while I tried to keep it together for Sarah. But every moment was laced with pain. The house felt colder, heavier, as if the very air had changed. Eventually, the time came for us to head back home. The thought of walking back into the same house where Danielle had carried out her affair made my skin crawl. Still, I knew I had to go. And I knew I needed to make it clear to Danielle that our marriage was over. I wasn't about to keep living a lie. When we arrived, Danielle was there waiting. She looked at us with red, tired eyes, as if still clinging to some hope of forgiveness. Before I could even say anything, Sarah ran into her arms like nothing had changed. It was a gut punch watching that pure love from our daughter, completely unaware of how broken everything had become. I knew we needed to talk, so I pulled Danielle aside to a quiet room where Sarah couldn't hear us. She jumped straight into apologizing again, full of promises and tears. She swore she had ended things with Chad, that she cut off all contact, but I couldn't help but scoff. Chad lived next door, for crying out loud. There was no way she had just magically cut him out of her life. I laughed, a bitter, empty laugh, and looked her straight in the eyes. I told her it was too late. Whatever she thought we had left, it was already gone. You really cut off contact with Chad? I asked, sarcasm dripping from every word. He lives next door, Danielle. You can't exactly pretend he doesn't exist. She stumbled over her words, trying to come up with something, anything, but I was done. I wasn't going to sit through another performance. No, I said, my voice steady. This is over. I'm divorcing you. Her eyes widened, the weight of my words finally landing. Shock and disbelief washed over her face, as if she hadn't expected me to actually say it out loud. She tried to plead, to explain, but I'd made up my mind. I had nothing left to give, and I wasn't going to spend another day pretending. The room went quiet. There was nothing else to say. The damage was beyond repair. Eventually, Danielle moved out, and I filed for divorce. I had no idea that the next chapter, fighting over custody, would be just as painful. The divorce dragged on for months, but thankfully, we had a prenup in place. That kept her from demanding alimony or trying to take more than she deserved, especially after I presented the proof of her affair. The court couldn't ignore that. In the end, we agreed on a 50-50 custody split for Sarah's sake. I followed the court order, paid my share of child support, and did everything I could to give Sarah the stable life she deserved. Danielle moved back in with her parents, and to my surprise, I managed to keep a decent relationship with her mom and dad. They were hurt too, but they never took sides against me. Sarah's time was divided between the two of us, 1 week with me, 1 with her mom. The idea was to make sure she still felt safe and loved, no matter where she was staying. When she was with me, I did my best to make our time together feel special. We'd go out shopping, grab the essentials, and I always let her pick out a new toy or outfit. It was my way of showing her that even though everything had changed, her dad would always be there. But over time, I started noticing something that didn't sit right with me. There was a pattern, one that kept showing up whenever Sarah came over. Danielle seemed to be cutting corners when it came to our daughter's basic needs. Sarah never looked neglected exactly, but she'd show up wearing old clothes, even though I knew her wardrobe was filled with newer, nicer things I had bought for her. One day, I gently brought it up with Danielle. I didn't want to start a fight, I just asked why Sarah wasn't wearing any of the new outfits I'd gotten her. Danielle shrugged it off, saying Sarah was saving them for special occasions. I found it odd, sure, but I let it go. Co-parenting wasn't easy, and I didn't want to create more tension. I figured as long as Sarah was happy and healthy, I could deal with the little things. So instead, I focused on giving Sarah the best moments I could whenever we were together. Whether it was a lazy afternoon at the park or a trip to her favorite spots, I tried to create memories that would remind her she was loved deeply and unconditionally. My marriage may have fallen apart, but I wasn't going to let that failure affect how I showed up for my daughter. Then something happened last month that shook me to my core. I was driving home from work, just like any other evening, when I pulled up to my house and spotted Sarah standing alone in the driveway. My heart skipped a beat. I parked quickly and rushed over to her, worried sick. When I asked what had happened, she said Danielle had dropped her off an hour ago. Right there on the porch. I was floored. Danielle had just left her, no call, no text, no heads up. She knew I normally got off work at 6 p.m. and was usually home by 6:15. But that day, I had to stay late, and it was already 7:30 by the time I made it back. Anything could have happened to Sarah during that time. I was furious, not just at the recklessness, but at the sheer lack of regard for our daughter's safety. I brought Sarah inside right away and made us some pasta for dinner. Once she was settled, I picked up my phone and called Danielle. The moment she answered, I could hear loud music and chatter in the background. It sounded like she was at a bar or some party. My frustration boiled over, and I asked her point blank why she hadn't called me before dropping Sarah off. Her response threw me off. She said, "Well, she's your daughter too. You should be responsible, not just me." That casual, almost dismissive tone made my blood boil. But as she kept talking, something in her voice tipped me off. There was a slur in her speech. It hit me then. She was drinking. Probably drunk. Realizing that this wasn't the time for a real conversation, I told her we'd discuss it when I brought Sarah back the next day. But then Danielle laughed like none of this was a big deal and told me to check the note she had given Sarah. That caught me off guard. A note? I called Sarah over and asked if her mom had given her something. She reached into her pocket and handed me a crumpled piece of paper. I unfolded it, and what I read nearly made me drop it. In the note, Danielle wrote that she no longer wanted to care for our daughter, claiming she couldn't do it anymore because the child support wasn't enough. I froze. I was stunned, completely blindsided. I was already paying a significant amount every month. And now she was using our daughter as a pawn to make some kind of statement? But instead of reacting with anger or yelling into the phone, I took a breath and made a choice. I was going to handle this the right way. I called Child Protective Services and the local police and reported Danielle for child abandonment. I had clear evidence, CCTV footage from my property showing her dropping Sarah off and leaving without any supervision. The police took the report seriously. They asked for Danielle's location and told me they'd be sending someone to arrest her for endangering a minor. As soon as the complaint was filed, I reached out to my lawyer and told him everything. It was time to fight for full custody. I had tried to be reasonable. I let the affair go for Sarah's sake, but this was something I couldn't overlook. Not long after, I got a call from Danielle's parents. They were in disbelief. Apparently, she had phoned them from jail, and they were completely blindsided. I told them exactly what had happened, how their daughter had abandoned Sarah and left her in a dangerous situation. They were heartbroken. While they admitted that they understood why I had to take legal action, they still begged me to reconsider pressing charges. They asked me to think about Danielle's mental health and the long-term consequences this would have on her life. I listened to their concerns, and I didn't respond with anger. I explained calmly that this wasn't some snap decision I made out of spite. It was about protecting Sarah. I told them that the safety and well-being of my daughter would always come first, no matter what. They pleaded even more, suggesting things like supervised visits or getting Danielle into therapy. I appreciated that they were trying to help. I really did. But I couldn't ignore the fact that Danielle had already broken my trust in the worst possible way again. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about keeping my daughter safe. Their words, their emotion, it didn't sway me. I had made up my mind. I was going to pursue full custody and create a stable, secure environment where Sarah didn't have to worry about being left alone again. I told them I'd be sending someone over in a few days to collect all of Sarah's things from their place. She'd be staying with me full-time moving forward. When I told Sarah what was happening, her face lit up. She was thrilled. And in that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. My little girl deserved peace, love, and a life without chaos. I couldn't undo the past, but I could give her a future where she felt safe, and that was all that mattered. After everything, I finally felt like things were starting to look up for both me and Sarah. A few weeks later, we were summoned to court. My lawyer came prepared and laid everything out clearly: the neglect, the manipulation, and the choices my ex-wife had made that put our daughter at risk. We presented the note Danielle had written, the one she sent with Sarah after dropping her off at my house without even a call. We explained how she left our little girl standing outside for over an hour, completely alone. On top of that, we pointed out how Danielle refused to let Sarah wear the clothes I bought her. It was why she always showed up looking worn down and underdressed, while Danielle, from the looks of it, didn't seem to be struggling at all. Her lawyer did her best to paint Danielle in a more sympathetic light, but the judge wasn't buying it. He saw right through it. It became clear that the child support I'd been faithfully paying was being misused, likely spent on Danielle herself rather than on Sarah. Then came the surprise I hadn't expected. The judge didn't just strip Danielle of custody, he also hit her with a $25,000 penalty for misappropriating the child support funds. That amount would go toward covering my legal fees as well. I sat there stunned. I never thought in a million years that the court would issue that kind of penalty. It was a harsh outcome, but one that sent a clear message. This wasn't just about money. This was about a child's well-being. I walked out of that courtroom feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was a bitter kind of victory, but it meant Sarah was finally free from the instability her mother had brought into her life. Since that ruling, I felt a deep sense of peace. Knowing that I'm the one responsible for raising Sarah without interference or chaos has brought so much comfort. Of course, that hasn't stopped Danielle and her family from blowing up my phone. They've been messaging non-stop, telling me I was too harsh, that I shouldn't have punished her like that. They tried to minimize what happened, like abandoning a child on a doorstep was no big deal. Some even said I'd make a terrible father. But I don't believe that, not for 1 second. I'd like to think I did the right thing. I acted to protect my daughter, plain and simple. Update 1: I want to thank everyone who truly understood what I was going through and why I felt like I had no choice but to seek full custody. Some folks have speculated that maybe Danielle's going through some kind of mental health crisis. I don't know. And honestly, I don't want to know. If she was struggling, she should have reached out to me instead of walking away from our child like that. Since the court decision, the past few weeks have been some of the happiest we've had in a long time. I've been building a daily routine for the two of us, and it's made such a difference. Mornings now mean waking up together, brushing our teeth side by side, and me helping her get ready for school. I even started watching YouTube tutorials to learn how to do a decent ponytail, getting better at it day by day. Regardless of what Danielle or her parents might think, I'm fully committed to this. My daughter deserves to feel secure and loved, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to give her a good life. Update 2: It's been about a month since my last update, and the reason I haven't written sooner is that life's been, well, full. But I recently learned something from a few mutual friends that floored me. Danielle is pregnant. 3 months along, apparently. And the father? Chad. From what I heard, Chad didn't take the news well. He begged her not to keep the baby, but she refused. In response, he walked out on her. That would explain some of her behavior lately: erratic, impulsive, and reckless. Danielle's been in a tight financial spot since then. She didn't want to turn to her parents again, afraid of being kicked out. So she did the unthinkable, she started selling off the new clothes I had bought for Sarah. That's why my daughter always looked like she had nothing decent to wear. All those saving it for special occasions excuses were just lies. And that note she left? The one demanding more child support? Yeah, that wasn't about Sarah at all. That was about her trying to squeeze more money out of me to support her new pregnancy. What haunts me most is that even knowing she was pregnant, Danielle still went out drinking and then abandoned our daughter like it was nothing. I shudder to think what could have happened if I hadn't gotten home when I did. Looking back, I'm beyond grateful I pushed for full custody. I can't imagine what Sarah might have been exposed to had she stayed in that environment with a mother more focused on her new problems than on the child she already had. Update 3: It's been 6 months now, and I can honestly say life has been beautiful. Sarah and I have grown so close, and I'm proud of the job I'm doing as a single parent. I've had to learn a lot on the fly, but I've put my whole heart into raising her. Danielle hasn't reached out once. She hasn't tried to visit Sarah or even check in. Part of me is glad. The silence means we've been able to live in peace. With New Year's coming up, I've planned something special, a surprise trip to Disneyland. Sarah's always been crazy about Disney characters, and I can't wait to see her eyes light up when she realizes where we're going. Just the thought of her smile fills my heart. We may not have the traditional family setup, but we've got love, we've got stability, and we've got each other. And right now, that's more than enough.